listening to Adventure Party for the third week of September 2022. This week, the party try to diagnose people who act out in RPGs. Can they be cured? Or can we all live with their condition? The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and related gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
And I'm Shane. And today we just have the two of us to partake in that most wonderful of gaming hobbies, which is complaining about other gamers and how they ruined your games. But I think maybe we have a particularly specific take on this.
For sure.
I cannot find where I originally spotted this, but I found a very interesting analogy or metaphor for this. The concept of torch-dropping. The idea that this is, you have your party of hardened D&D mercenaries, first level characters, eager for the fight. They go into the dark and dusty tomb. They see their first goblin, warty-nosed and with a rusty dagger. And the person holding the torch says, "I dropped the torch in a panic," and run away. Leading to a swift TPK as the blind players are torn apart by dark visioned goblins, and everyone gets slightly mad at this torch dropper for reasons that the torch dropper claims he cannot understand.
Yeah, personally I suspect the problem there began well before that campaign did. There certainly seems to be a mismatch of expectations for one, because the rest of the players, and presumably the GM had notions of a dungeon crawl and characters who would be invested in tackling a dungeon crawl. And this player, whether it was through lack of effort on the rest of the table, or their own contrariness, or just some mismatch of communication, just wasn't on that game plan, and had created a character who would conceivably just drop a lantern and run at the first sight of a pretty minor challenge as dungeon crawling goes.
Now, we're not necessarily singling out the great thespian who says, "My character is quite clearly a green recruit with no experience, and of course they must panic in the face of their first enemy, as all men in great military fiction should." I don't think we're necessarily talking about that. We're talking about a more general topic, which is self-sabotage as a means of expression. It doesn't need to be specifically that topic. I mean, it's not necessarily expression either. Sometimes people just get ideas about how effective a given tactic is, and will indulge in it without first thought. And of course, there's always people who will come up with their own objectives, such as, proving you can walk through a minefield without shoes or something,
Yeah, like that's actually sparked off a thought. Perception, as in somebody could have misunderstood what's going on. As in, they may be under the impression that they're facing not a mere goblin, but something much more dangerous, and thinking, okay, my character is going to die and doesn't want to, and is going to leg it. And from that point of view, that can make more sense. While not an ideal situation, it's not like we've all been in tables where, not necessarily through any one person's fault, there was information just wasn't conveyed that in an expected way. Somebody misunderstood what was said, didn't hear over Doritos bag crinkling, or was distracted thinking of whatever. So out of poor and imperfect information, you can end up with quite imperfect decisions.
And often the GM won't realize just how deep the decision hole has gone until they've already started hopping down it. You could be half an hour in from the start of the series of bad decisions before realizing, they seem to think that goblins are 37 feet tall, and covered in gun turrets.
Well, there's the infamous gazebo anecdote, likely apocryphal, where a player who had no idea what a gazebo was kept asking a GM for details about this clearly dangerous monster, and eventually started shooting it with arrows.
Yeah, angering the gazebo. Although, to be fair to that poor hypothetical creature, there was a monster for the longest time in the Monster Manual called the Glabrazoo, and I can totally imagine a certain type of nerd having encyclopedic knowledge of all the monsters in the Monster Manual, but no idea about banned parkland architecture or facilities. So, I find the story a lot more plausible than the urban legends would make it out to be.
No, I could see that. So there's a couple of layers to, like I was alluding to, the problem of a PC acting in a way contrary to party success and or survival. There's layers to it. I mean, there's misunderstanding, what action they should be trying to do to maximize the group's chances in a desperate situation. But there might also be mischief, to put it nicely, trying to rob another party member during a session, or trying to go for the loot while the others are locked in hand-to-hand combat, or fulfilling their own agenda, which could be, my character's actually an evil cultist and is going to to shank the others in the back at the first given opportunity.
Yeah, though I'm not going to necessarily say this is always malicious when this is done.
I'd actually agree.
Remember, at the end of the day, these are games, and an important part of being in a game is play, and an important part of play is experimentation, learning where things are, seeing what happens. And so people might use experimentation as a way to sort of explore not just the game world they're in, but also sort of the social situation they're in. Maybe they are genuinely interested in whether this is a social situation where they can get away with stealing. And one might say, it's quite obviously that you probably can't because of the way information flows to the table. And also, what do you benefit from it? But again, if the point of the whole exercise is play and experimentation is part of play, you can see where the logic's the wrong word, but the impulse might come from.
That actually reminds me of something. Not my first Cyberpunk 2020 character, but certainly one that delved into the newbie Munchkin school of thought, where he started as a full body conversion with rather heavy weaponry, and eventually picking up another set of arms and a shoulder-mounted mortar, not even exaggerating on that one, and was just looking for more and more ridiculous weaponry to put into as many hands and or joints, and eventually got himself into trouble when I decided that the proper response to him having his fancy body insulted by somebody was to open fire on that person. So he quite rightfully and sensibly got a missile through the chest for his trouble, and that was a salutary lesson in try not to create characters who are that hair trigger unless you're willing to scratch that character sheet quite quickly.
Yeah, and I always wondered, did the writers of Cyberpunk 2020 come up with the Cyber Psycho Squad as a piece of world-building lore, or as a way to introduce anti-cyborg missiles as a police response?
I can't help but think that's a chicken and egg situation, because there would have been some sort of SWAT team to deal with, like in the dangerous cities of the 2020s of that timeline. But it's a good question. Yeah, the max tax squads in Cyberpunk are. Yeah, they're effectively legalized cyber psychos from what I remember of the background.
Yeah, but it is a fair point. Is this like things that we would consider obvious in the real world, such as like you're not supposed to give yourself 14 arms covered with machine guns and walk around killing anyone who looks at you funny. Part of the point of having an artificial game world is that you don't need to take that for granted. And maybe for you, the act of finding out could be a valid experience. Although if you enjoy that sort of, the self-structured behavior, that's fine in a vacuum, but you probably aren't playing in a vacuum. You're probably playing at a table or over Discord or Zoom these days with 3 to 6 other players. And there's a question of how many of their buddies they want to see take missiles to the chest.
There is that. You see, there's different expectations between tables and between RPGs and between settings. If you're treating D&D as Avengers, in fantasy, it's not quite so risky if a player messes around somewhat with their characters. Or if you're treating, say, D&D as a finely honed tactical game where every move counts and mistakes could be incredibly dangerous to everyone involved, then that guide, or dropping the lantern and legging it, that's pretty much going to do a party wipe each time, which isn't great for the rest of the players or for the game master trying to invest in creating a world or showing a world. I know I'm a bit of an advocate of a conversation, trying to be clear about expectations and session zero, or talking about ideas about what a campaign is going to entail. But I really do think those are essential, especially for any length of a campaign. If it's going to be a session or two, people being fuzzy on the details isn't necessarily the worst. But you don't want long building resentments over years of campaigning because somebody got the wrong idea early on and is getting frustrated because they've invested X or Y into their character and somebody else is not, or mocking about, or taking or doing an action which makes sense in character but is detrimental to the rest of the party. I've somewhat fallen out of love with the excuse of I'm just playing my character. You created that character.
Yeah, and character development is the thing. Yeah, like there's sort of a balance between yourself and the rest of the table, because you are supposed to have some room to self-express and have characters have flaws and goals and all that sort of stuff. There's also the question of like agency, and that's sort of something that comes with this is like some people just have a bad relationship with structure, and that could include the structure of being a hero in a ongoing RPG. And I have to wonder, is that sort of rebellion against structure actually more likely to cause this sort of destructive behavior than the person who didn't get the memo at the start? Is it less a matter of, I wasn't paying attention when we said we were playing a grim and gritty thing where we're dropping torch would get us killed, versus you're half an hour into the dungeon and everyone is just, send the alpha into the room to check for street doors and tap every surface with a 10-foot pole, and they've decided this is boring, I'm going to do something unpredictable, and that will liven up this staid and boring procedure. We don't need procedures, we need action, and especially terrible action.
Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah. It's just like the sort of the question of the validity of the Leroy Jenkins skit is like, is it that he wasn't paying attention, or did he never intend to go along with this ridiculous raid plan in the first place?
That's a good question.
Maybe he just was done with his fried chicken, got back his computer and just decided, yeah, I want to press some buttons now. Now, procedures and structure and the like are, they're a whole other topic of themselves. I think as both of us as connoisseurs of the OSR wars, we've seen endless back and forths between the rules light versus rules in depth people. But also, this is a particularly newer trend the last year, is the freeform versus proceduralism movement is one of the current OSR bugbears. Whereas there's one group who's like, get them down in the dungeon, get them messing with puzzles, get them killing themselves with bad saving throws. That's the way to go. And then there's this emerging people who say, no, we need to have rules for our faction conflicts, rules for the equipment inventory system, not rules, but procedures for what you can do in each 10 minutes of dungeon exploration, and sort of parcel out the different levels of play into nice structures which are easier to organize, but maybe some people find them limiting. And sort of there's a back and forth there, and some people will find the structure helpful, and some people will find the structure straitjacketing, and will maybe instinctively sort of rebel against, things are going well because we're following this little playbook, but I would rather things go badly than that we follow the playbook at all. And that's a very bespoke balance that could take a while for any given group in any given system to find. Yeah,
and I mean, a group's combined preferences can shift over time as well. Not to mention the individuals involved. A GM might get tired of running, be tired of coming up with house rules constantly for rules light games and want to switch to something a bit meatier. Or the opposite, they might find a comprehensive rule set limiting and want to go to something written on an index card.
They may want to. They may have started with great creative ambitions for their grand campaign, but after a few attempts at running that, they've decided they're just going to run modules for the foreseeable future. Yeah, these sort of things are going to change over time and your situation, and that's sort of the process of feeling out. Well, we'll try this, we'll try that, and it can take time. And part of the process for some people may be just this once. I'm acting out. I'm going to make a bard character, even though I will always charge into combat because it's the only thing I know how to do. Or I will make my sorcerer plot with the powers of chaos for 3 extra 0-level spells and very obvious chaos mutations.
Yeah. The thing is, there's another way around such friction. It's solo gaming or one-on-one gaming.
Yeah, this is sort of an interesting thing that's really, really, it's been around, obviously, since the hobby started, but it's really sort of developed as its sort of subgenre in the last 5 years or so. There's an awful lot more resources for solo gaming in any system you choose, but also dedicated systems for playing, or journaling games is another side where it's less about, you're playing D&D with your self-insert, but more, would you like to record down your version of the 1,000-year vampire story? And all this stuff is interesting because it changes the context for this kind of explorative play, or being intentionally suboptimal as a character choice. Because once it's you alone with your consequences, then the consequences become something very, very personal to you. Like if you mess up, drop your torch, and it's the rest. It's like these beloved NPCs you'd gathered who get torn apart by goblins. That feels very different when it's, just the GM telling you the screams of your friends as you retreat down the corridor, versus, and in your life, in real life, the rest of the table is glaring at you going, what the hell, Billy? Why'd you ruin our game? Now we don't have a game anymore. So it's a different place where it's a lot safer to sort of indulge in this sort of explorative, self-destructive play. I think it's a more interesting phenomenon to try to work with this sort of tragedy-based play. But there's also, certain genres of more traditional games which are much more about engaging with your vices. Lots of the Powered by the Apocalypse games, they're very explicit, like saying your character when you choose a playbook, you'll often not only be choosing the strengths of your character, but you'll be choosing their vices, and very often you'll be given mechanical benefits for accepting fiction in the story bad things.
World of Darkness games had something similar-ish, if not quite, where you could get willpower back for playing into your nature. So if you had a soldier nature, you'd be getting willpower back for tactics and things like that. Whereas I believe New World of Darkness Vampire had sins, and you had to pick one of the 7 deadly sins. So if it was pride, then you had that was going to be an issue for your character, but could get you XP for playing up to it.
And that works for something like World of Darkness, where ostensibly the point is not to just be a vampire with a katana in his trench coat, but actually to role play the process of becoming a great monster and showing the horrors inside of society and such. So that makes sense, but if your group has decided, no, like, we're a bunch of werewolves and we are taking down the man, and then you're sort of deliberately playing off in the side margins, going, I want to increase my rage so that I kill all of these silly civilians because I think that would be funny.
If you've got a game, if you've got a table where that is regarded as fine, then, or within the bounds of what characters should be doing, fair enough. But if it's like throwing that out unexpectedly, for me that would break immersion quite a bit, because why exactly are these other characters hanging out with this utter psychopath?
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that we want to come back to. This is like, I think one of the big things is the spontaneity of these kinds of things. Previously, this character had been quiet the entire night, carefully taking the torch and poking into dark places, and all of a sudden they drop the torch. And the other players are shocked. I thought you were completely on board with this whole very carefully doing the dungeon thing. I thought you were happy to, risk some hit points and a few hirelings to take on the goblins. Why is this sudden change? And of course, in the person's eye, it's not a change at all. It's just, this has been my moment. This is what I was really waiting for, is this chance to show off my character in all their flawed glory. But are they being truthful in that? Or maybe they have decided after, say, 3 hours of tapping walls with a 10-foot pole, they decided, no, I think this game will be much better if we start acting out. As I say, with a game like Powered by Apocalypse, where there's sort of these inbuilt flaws, and particularly if you have a Session 0 character creation session, where everyone develops their history with each other, and they all hear about each other's flaws as they're building the character. This is like, oh, cool, we're going to have a conflict where your character does drugs and my straight-laced cop can't abide it, and we're going to have conflict, it's going to be cool. Whereas if, this suddenly happens in the middle of a tense combat situation, suddenly it's completely out of nowhere, it's unexpected, and I mean, we don't want to keep circling the same point, but it is this idea of setting expectations of, were we expecting there to be people dropping torches, or were we expecting everyone to be super competent?
Playing devil's advocate for a second, that you can end up in a situation where people's key assumptions are so different that it doesn't occur to them to discuss them. Because honestly, I'm probably not going to think of discussing whether somebody's going to chuck a torch and run at the first sight of a goblin if I'm going playing D&D. It's just not a scenario that occurred to me as a thing that would happen.
Yeah.
Honestly, I like even for experienced players, I rarely see much in the way of fleeing fights, which is probably to the detriment overall, but besides the point. So I suppose it would not occur to me to even discuss it, like under normal circumstances.
Yeah. And if this is the result of a spontaneous, I just had an idea, if I drop the torch, suddenly there will be drama, and they act on it without impulse control, then it's harder to, like, all the discussion previously in the world can't really do that. So then the question becomes, is it okay to suddenly have these, in your head, cool ideas for ways you can mess things up to make things quote-unquote interesting? Or should you pause, stop the game and say, guys, I think my character will drop the torch here. Are you cool with that? And that's one of those sort of weird social situations where technically you're doing nothing wrong if you're talking with everyone about this. But if it happens constantly, people might start talking about game flow and other esoteric things. It's like, do we need this? Okay, Barry the Wizard has got another chance to snort chaos drugs. Do we need to stop the game for 20 minutes to do a whole bunch of rolls? Or could we, continue this murder investigation we're doing? There's questions of, like, is there a social setup in your group to talk about this kind of expression as whether it's okay? Is there a chance to have a mini session 0 in the middle of session 47? Or is there so much social pressure to live in the moment and continue the game as we are that people who might be struggling against that kind of situation feel the better way is to, as the people say, ask for forgiveness rather than permission?
Yeah, again, and this answer almost feels like a cop-out, but it depends.
It does. It's sort of a group thing you have to figure out. And again, this is one of those things where you might not think you need to figure out, we had a session 0. We talked about everything that's going to come up with in the game. And if you follow just a regular session 0 prep sheet, you might not think of everything, and you might find yourself in this odd situation without having really prepped for it. And that's when people are not ready for what they're doing, tempers might get heated.
Yeah, tempers have gone heated over lesson games in my experience.
Yeah.
I suppose it might be time for those final thoughts.
Perhaps. It sort of comes down to social structure for me. We all have played with people like this, and if we're in it actually probably gets easier if they're part of our social group. This is like, we can just sort of compensate for, Jimmy Bob always likes playing his characters with no social or combat skills. That's fine. We can compensate for that if we're used to it. So I think the real solution is less prepping for it, because if you prep for it, it's probably not going to happen. The real skill here is resilience in the moment. This is like, have we set up our things to say, can we stop the game for a second and discuss what's just happened or what is about to happen? I think is probably the real thing there. It's just like developing the skill to say, rather than keep going, should we pause and discuss, or are we all confident that we can roll with these kinds of punches? Like, am I going to complain, or is the group going to complain? I think that's really the things. Like, maybe it's session 0, rather than talking about don't use transmutation spells and don't have spiders in the game. It might be better to go, what's our game plan for if someone is completely thrown for a loop by something happening? Or should we make sure, how important is our game flow, and how willing are we to have to stop the game for half an hour to talk something through? And I think that's probably where we need to stop. Also, you need to admit that you're not going to get this right, particularly if you're a new group or a new system.
Yeah.
You're not going to say, we have session 0, and then that's our rules forever.
Yeah, no, that's not realistic.
same as most games need house rules for your individual set of characters, most social contracts need to have clause to add amendments. It's only worth what paper's written on.
Yep.
Any particular thoughts you'd like to finish off with Dave?
Yeah, I mean, you can't account for every situation, but I suppose you can get an idea of general principles, as in how much people like to be surprised as a general rule, what they're generally expecting from people, from other players, from the GM, and you might be able to head off a bunch of problems that way, and have everyone have a smoother experience and a more enjoyable experience, at least in theory. Yeah, I suppose put in a little effort, before the game to hash these things out, is my thinking. And
don't be afraid to monkey with that setup if you find that, no, when people drop the torches and you're suddenly in the dark surrounded by goblins, maybe that is where things get interesting. The only way to find out is to play.
Maybe it is. And with that drop, I think this party is over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account @AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution-NonCommercial-ShareAlike and Version 3 license.